Good evening. Today my guest is former UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Fernand de Varennes. Good evening, Mr. de Varennes. Welcome to Armenia. How do you assess the current global trends in protecting minority rights, and what are the biggest challenges to implementing effective minority rights protections at the international level?
I think we have to be honest and to say that the situation has not improved at all. In fact, we're going backwards in terms of protecting minorities and actually trying to prevent situations of genocide and other atrocities. In the last 10 years especially, we've seen a dramatic increase in violent conflicts and wars around the world. And most of these wars are internal inside a country, and most of them actually involve minorities. And this seems to be happening because you have governments which have become more nationalistic. They represent essentially more the interests of the majority. And many tend to actually see minorities as a threat, somehow dangerous, or not belonging to being others. The United Nations and the whole international human rights system should be protecting all human rights equally, but it seems like in relation to minorities, it hesitates more. There's not a great deal of expertise or focus on this area at the United Nations. And this is where I think we're seeing some of the greatest challenges and gaps and weaknesses in the international system. Very quick comment, we've seen it in Nagorno-Karabakh, in fact. That the UN was not able to intervene directly. And this, in my opinion, is not only about Nagorno-Karabakh, but in other parts of the world we're seeing the same situation occurring, involving the rights of minorities and their protection.
How do you evaluate the international community's approach to addressing such conflicts, Mr. de Varennes?
Well, I don't think the international community did a very good job in it, did they? I mean, the situation degraded, got worse until the extent that most Armenians, I think almost all Armenians, have left the region. So to put it very, very briefly, I think it's obviously a failure. The international community was not able or not willing to intervene directly, forcefully. And that's a bad precedent. I mean, it shows that governments can do things that are clearly, I would say, against international law and still get away with it.
But however, what lessons can the international community draw from the recent mass displacement of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh?
And by the way, the massive displacement is part of a global phenomenon. The number of displaced people has reached historic levels now. We need to do better. We need to reform the United Nations, because the United Nations is not doing what was supposed to be its main job of ensuring international peace and stability. That's not happening. Even the human rights mechanisms that we have in place are actually very weak. And where the United Nations has really not been equipped to address the new challenges of technology, including social media. So I think countries such as Armenia and others, like-minded countries, should use its own understanding, knowledge concerning genocide and the mistreatment of minorities to take the lead, or to work with other countries, really to take the lead to try to reform the United Nations, to be really an organization protecting people, and not only an organization dealing with the interests of states. And it can do that, because I think, and I'm an optimist, but I feel that there are many governments who realize that we have crisis like we've never seen in our history, certainly since the Second World War, and that therefore, with the United Nations, which is about 100 years old, almost 100 years old, maybe it's no longer fit for purpose. Maybe it is time to really have strong human rights mechanisms for minorities and others, and ways to address early warning mechanisms to really address the process that is involved behind, for example, genocide and conflicts and other atrocities. There's nothing mysterious. We actually know the process. We have a pretty good understanding of where you can have situations of internal conflicts and even situations of possible genocide. But we need to have in place instruments and mechanisms within the UN that takes into account the changing world. The world today is nothing like it was in the Second World War, but the UN is still structured as it is.
And also such a question, I want to, let's say, touch upon the topic of COP29, which was held in November in Baku. I just want your opinion, your personal opinion, how could UN let this event happen in, let's say, not considering the fact that there are lots of prisoners of war, also political prisoners and many journalists imprisoned?
Yeah, if I can answer this in a more general way, I think there are, with many international organizations now, I think it's very unfortunate that we have situations where you have countries, governments with horrific human rights backgrounds that are permitted to host international events, even with football, international football, environmental areas also, and quite a few other areas, where some governments seem to use their influence, their resources, their money to be able to, there's a word, whitewash or greenwash their own records. Without commenting directly on that, I would say generally, I think we have to pressure international organizations to do better. If Nazi Germany was still around, could Nazi Germany actually host the future conference on the environment? Well, the way the UN is behaving right now, the answer would seem to be yes. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong with this. So more broadly, there ought to be a kind of code of moral conduct, even for the United Nations, even for the World Football Federation, and even the Olympic Committee, where we need to actually perhaps reflect at what we're allowing and why we are allowing even money, essentially, to dictate who will host or not. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with the way some of these organizations are speaking.
Thanks for the interview, Mr. de Varennes.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Today I have talked to former UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Fernand de Varennes. Thanks for watching us.